Hello, this is Layla from Silk&Wool, and today's video is again about my modern vintage jumper pattern. And in this video I will show you how to work on the last cable here in the middle, how to work on decreases along the neckline, and then how to pick up the stitches for the edging nicely, so that your right side and your wrong side are looking nice and presentable. So I have created a small swatch which corresponds, there's a few reverse stockinette stitches on the sides and a cable which represents the middle cable. So in this video I will disregard these sides of the pattern. I will only work on the middle part to show you the techniques that you need to know to make sure your sweater looks like mine. So I'm here about to start this part here, where you cross the cables and bind off stitches and separate the front into two parts. So I will work the reverse stockinette stitches here. So now we need to do at the same time the cable crosses, and bind off the stitches in the middle of the cable. So we take 4 stitches, put them behind our work on a cable needle, knit the next 4 stitches, and now we're going to knit and bind off the 4 stitches I have on the cable needle. So this needle is getting in the way for the video. Let's make it more clear. So knitted 1 stitch, knitted the next one, and now I'm binding them off. So next one, and the last one from the cable needle. Hopla, like so. So next we are putting the next 4 stitches from the main needle onto your cable needle. Leave them in front of our work. And we continue now working from the main needle, and we bind off these 4 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we now get back to our cable needle that was in front. And as you can see, we now have 4 stitches here. These ones are bound off, and we have 4 stitches on the cable needle, and we have 1 more stitch on our right needle. So to create the correct stitch count, we bind off 1 more stitch from the cable needle, and we need the rest, 2 and 3. So what we have now is we have our reverse stockinette part. We have 4 knit stitches from the cable. We have a line of bound off stitches. We have 4 knit stitches after that on our needle. And we continue purling until until the end of this row. For you, when you're working on the sweater, you will purl your purl stitches and then have 16 knit stitches for the side cable, purl 2, and so on. So now I will be working using just 1 needle, but for you, to make things easier, I recommend putting this right half, so the stitches that finish with the first 4 knit stitches, to put them on an extra cable or on an extra needle. And we're now going to be working only on the left side. But so I'm knitting the reverse stockinette part until I get to the last 4 stitches. And I purl these 4 stitches and turn my work around. There we go. So the next row, our instructions are knit 1, do double decrease. So double decrease is I'm inserting my needle knitwise through both of the next 2 stitches as if I were going to knit them 2 together, but I'm not knitting them 2 together. I'm slipping them on my right needle. I knit the next stitch, and then I grab those 2 stitches I slipped and pass them over the knitted stitch. So that's a double decrease. We now have here 2 knit stitches, And we continue working in reverse stockinette. So now next, sorry, drop the stitch, next 3 rows I am just working in pattern without any increases or decreases. So as I said, when you work on the sweater, you also need to work on the side cables. So this is the wrong side row. I've knitted the reverse stockinette part stitches and I'm purling the last 2. Turn our work. Knit 2, purl. So, and another wrong side row. Last 2 stitches. And now I'm going to show you how we're going to be decreasing the stitches for the rest of the rows of your left side. So we knit 1 stitch. The yarn stays where it is. We slip the next stitch, which is a knit stitch, knitwise. We purl the next stitch and then we pass over the knitted stitch, the slip stitch over the purled stitch. So I am going to get quickly to the next decrease, and you're going to do, if you're depending on your gauge and size, you will follow a certain rhythm of these decreases. So for me, for size M, these decreases are happening every 4th row. You can now see here how neat and nice it looks. You really can't see much of the decrease. And this is very important because this way your shaping will be very symmetrical, very neat, and then when you pick up the stitches for the ribbing along that edge in a way that I will show you, this will create a very neat V-shape neckline. So my last row before the next set of increases. Okay. And so I'll show you once again. So we knit the first stitch, we slip the next stitch knitwise, we purl the next stitch, and then we grab the slipped stitch and we pass it over with a purl. And we continue. So now I will continue for a few more rows to create a little bit more of the length for my swatch, and I will show you how to do the right side, although the right side is a bit more straightforward in my opinion, but still. So I have completed a small section here, and I'm now going to get back to my right side and work these stitches as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our yarn. So we have completed this bit. Now we need to turn our work round and using the end of the yarn we start working on the wrong side. We start with 4 purl stitches, and then we need the reverse stockinette part and continue the row. So the next row I'm working my reverse stockinette first, and then I do the double decrease. So once again, grab 2 stitches together, knitwise, slip them onto the right needle, knit the next stitch, and pass the slipped stitches over the knit stitch, and then knit the last stitch. Now we're going to work for 3 rows. And the stitches run away from me. So when you're doing this, please don't forget about your side cable. I'm just not showing it to make this video shorter and to save myself a little bit of time. Okay, knit the last 2 stitches. Purl the first 2 stitches on the wrong side. Work the reverse stockinette bit. So to decrease on the right side, we work until we get to the last 3 stitches on the needle. So this was a purl stitch, this is a knit stitch, and we just grab them both and knit them together and knit the last stitch. So this is how you simply decrease on the right side. I'm now going to complete my little sample and show you how to pick up the stitches along the neckline and start ribbing them. Right, so I have completed my small sample. And now I'm going to show you how to pick up the stitches and correctly make decreases on the neckline. And so I have gotten some contrasting color yarn so that you can see it better, and I've got some stitch markers, and I will show you or my needles, never mind, how to correctly use stitch markers so that for you it's easier to work. So I use stitch markers that you can open and close. They can look like this, or I have also these beautiful ones. They also open and close. You can also use scrap yarn and just thread it through the stitch that you need to mark. Because there's going to be lots of decreases, and we're going to be decreasing always from the both sides of a certain stitch. Using classical stitch markers that you slip on the needle is not the most convenient way, because you will always need to move those markers and it's fiddly. So because I don't have the back side that goes together with this little front, what I will do is I will cast on an odd number of stitches. So these are the stitches that basically, as the pattern says, you need to pick up. This is our seam, the front and the back. So you need to pick up one stitch in that seam, and then an odd number of stitches across your back, and then one stitch into the other seam. So that gives you again an odd number of stitches. So I think I'm going to go with 9 maybe. 2, 4, 5, 6, and I'm using the wrong end. So imagine that this is me picking up the stitches across the back. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, let's say. So we picked up the stitches across the back into the seam, and now we're picking up the stitches across the right front. So we're going to be putting our needle. So you see we did 2 knit stitches on the side, and one of them has sort of turned inside to create a selvage, and the second one is clearly visible as this chain here. So we're going to put in our needle into the space next to this visible knit stitch, so that the other knit stitch is on the side of our needle. Yeah. We're going to grab the yarn and pull it out. And now it's quite easy. You have one hole per one row. So you put your needle into the next hole. So your next selvage stitch is sort of on your needle. You grab the yarn and you pull it out. And so here is our next row. And if the relation between your stitch tension and your row tension is the same as mine. So for example, if you divide your number of stitches per 4 inches by the number of rows you get for 4 inches, and you get the same number as if when you divide my count, then what you should be doing is you should be picking up the stitches from 4 rows, and then the next row, the next hole, you skip and you put your needle into the one after, and you pick up a stitch, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, skip this one, and again 1, 2, 3. And we're getting to our cable. So we need to check that again we have an odd number of stitches: 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. So now we need to pick up 2 more stitches, and so I will go into this big one, and then for the next stitch what I will do is I will go into here, but I will also put my needle under. So these are the stitches that we cast off when we were separating the fronts into the right and left panels. So when you pick up the stitches in the very middle, you put your needle both through your top layer and through those stitches that you bound off. 1, now we pick up 1 stitch from the middle, so I grab those 2 strands and I grab some stitch from the second layer, right, and I'm going to mark this stitch already. I didn't mark the stitches here because they just cast on, but this one, so what I will do is I will take my marker, I will open it, and I will mark the stitch itself. Now I need to pick up the same number of stitches on the other side, so 1 here, 1 through this big one, grabbing the second layer, and so 2, 4, 6, 8, and we need to pick up 11 stitches on this side, and we keep the same rhythm, so 1, 2, 3, 4, skip 5, 6, 7, 8, skip, 9, 10, and 11. So when I was casting on these stitches, I made a small mistake, because the way the pattern is written is you pick up the odd number of stitches along the back, one in the seam, then you pick up the stitches along the right side, one in the middle, left side, and then in the end you pick up the stitch into the seam between the left front and the back. So I have undone one stitch on this needle, and I'm casting on this stitch here as if this were the stitch that we pick up from the seam. So now we're ready to work in the round, and the first round is a setup round where we set up for our ribbing. So what is important here is to make sure that the 3 stitches that will be the center stitches of the decreases, so one in the very middle of the front and one on each side where the back joins the front, which is the stitch that we pick up from the seam, that they are knit stitches in our setup row. So to do that, we start our work by a purl stitch, purl 1, knit 1. This is tricky. Purl 1, knit 1, purl, knit, purl, sorry. And so this is, then we knit the stitch, and this is the stitch that you should have picked up from the seam. So we mark this stitch with the marker, and we continue working along the right side now. Purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, and my stitch marker has fallen off, but let me put it back. So purl, this is the knit stitch of the center front, and we continue purl, knit. I am going to turn around my magic loop, purl, knit, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, and this is the stitch picked up from the seam, knit, and put a marker. Into the next into it. So we're now ready to continue with the next round. And in the next round, we're going to do decreases both on the back and in the center front. The key here is to be very attentive to the rhythm of decreases, because for the center front we're going to be decreasing every round, and for these decreases we're going to be decreasing every second round. And you need just to watch your work and make sure that your ribbing stays in place, so you knit the knit stitches and purl the purl stitches every round, regardless of the size you're making and the number of the stitches between the decrease places. So I'm going to rib, starting with a purl stitch, until I have one stitch before the marked stitch, and I'm going to do the double decrease. So I slip 2 stitches, I knit the next one, and I pass both slip stitches together over. And now I continue ribbing, but because we have decreased the purl stitch, the next stitch I'm working is a knit stitch. Purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, and I'm now one stitch before the marked stitch in the middle of the front. Decrease, double decrease, and continue ribbing, and the next stitch is a knit stitch. Knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. I'm just going to shift the middle of my magic loop so that it's in the middle of the front right and front left. This way. it's easier to make the decreases. Right, and I'm continuing knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, and I'm now one stitch before the last marked stitch, and I'm doing a double decrease, and our round is finished. So the next round we're going to work simply across our decrease points here and here, and only decrease the stitches in the front. So the next stitch is a knit stitch, knit, purl, knit, purl, and I made a mistake in the previous row. This should be a knit stitch and I purled it, so I'm going to correct that. Mistakes happen, but it's important to keep the ribbing. So knit, so the next stitch is a knit as well, because that's where the decrease happened last time, and the next stitch is a knit stitch as well. So along the right back decrease point we now have 3 knit stitches, and we go back to ribbing, purl, knit, purl, turn around my magic loop, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, and so this is my marked stitch, the center one. I have gotten to 1 stitch before it, and I do a double decrease again here, and here our next stitch is a purl stitch, so I continue ribbing, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, and I have now 3 knit stitches here where we decreased the last time. And we're on to the next round. Round 4. Continue ribbing. And we're now 1 stitch to the side decrease point, and in this round we do double decreases here as well as in the front. and we continue with a purl stitch, knit, and continue ribbing till you get, so this is our marked stitch in front. We're one stitch before it, and we're doing the double decrease. And we continue ribbing, so now the next stitch after the decrease is a knit stitch. So we knit it, and I'm going just to show you one more decrease. So we get to one stitch before the marked stitch at the end of the round. This is the marked stitch, you can see it clearly, and we do a double decrease here. And you continue working in this fashion for a few more rounds, and I hope you can see here. So this is our pickup, how it looks on one side, on the other side. It's a very small sample, so it's a bit difficult to see. Let me get rid of all these ends of yarn. So this is a nice pickup, and your center decrease, and these ones you can't really see very well on my small sample. And they don't look super nice because we didn't pick up the stitches here, but we cast them on. But this should give you an idea of what you need to do to get this nice and tidy neckline. Also, I have to say that some authors they do not decrease the stitches in here as well. My preference is to do that because I like when my collar sort of hugs my neck rather than just lay there, because I like it when the very back of my neck is warm. So this could also be your personal preference. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.